welcome back. Welcome back to my office. Welcome back to my channel. I've got a really intense show for you today. First, let's talk about what you just saw in the earlier video. Video before this, you saw one of the walls, part of the shelves of my office. Okay, so a friend of mine, who in my autobiography is named Kraken, he drew a picture. It's like an eyeball thing with a mouth and like antenna kind of things, and it's got a tail. You can see that if you go back and you watch it. It's framed and on my wall. You saw my hats. One of them is the black hat that I wore in an earlier video. Then right next to that is a leather hat. Got that a long time ago. When I first started writing, in 2004, when I first started writing novels, I bought that hat. That's my Simon Bard hat. It's, there's a storyteller in my world. His name is Simon Bard, and he tells stories. He's kind of immortal, and he has an object that allows him to see everything that has happened, the entire past, and everything that's happening at the moment. So he tells stories to heroes to try to prepare them, help them with whatever enemies they're facing. So that's my Simon Bard hat. The hat brim came off of it, and I got some twine, and I braided a new rim for it, and sewed the new rim in onto the hat. So I'm pretty proud of that. Then you saw, the next hat you saw looked kind of, it was very beige, and it looked kind of rough. That hat I got, that's actually made out of a tarp that went up and down Central America with coffee beans, I think, is what. And it was like a transport tarp, and when they were done with it, they made a hat out of it. Next to that, you saw Casper. That's a Casper the Ghost album, and it's got, if you look on the butt, on Casper's butt, it's got Tom Waits' signature on it. So the story goes that Tom Waits, the alternative music guru, god, was in a record store one day, and he got recognized. And the person was like, oh, please sign something for me. So he picked up Casper, he wrote on Casper's butt, and he gave it to us. It was given to one person, then the next, and it ended up in my office. If you go down from that, you start seeing my bookshelf. I've got a statue of Medusa on it. I've got a mug that's got a big F. It's in the shape of a bomb, and it's basically my F-bomb mug. It was bought for me by my children. I have a griffin on there. I have a fairy, a fire fairy. She's holding 2 balls of fire, and her wings are made out of fire, and she's dressed in a dress. There's a dragon statue with a little candle, and a hardwood ram that I got for my 8th wedding anniversary. You go down from there and you start seeing the books that I have published. There's a shelf full of skulls, and it has all the books that I have published. I think at the time Song was missing because my son was reading it, but I could be wrong on that. It was either Lethem or Song that was missing. Rafe is reading those books. So that's what you saw last time. And okay, so I wanted to show you what my desk looks like right now. Let's talk about a few things. First, I got a set of keys. I got a new doorknob for my office. My old doorknob had like a little lever that you could pull up and down like this. And my dog loved to nose that and use it to open the door whenever she wanted in and out. And she could do that in her bedroom. She could do that anywhere she wanted to. And it was hard to control what room she was in and stuff like that. So we got a new doorknob. With it came keys for the lock. So now I have keys to my office. So I'm going to hide them in places around the house so that if I ever lock myself out of my office, you know how keys work. Okay. The other thing I wanted to show you today is this set of composition books right here. Okay. I basically have these so that I don't need them. This is a composition book that I write love stories in. It is here, and I never use it. But I have it here. And writing in composition books is oftentimes difficult and takes a long time. And so when I see it on my desk, it is kind of a reminder that I'm lucky to have a computer and I'm lucky to be able to write as fast as I can. The other books are some world building books. They've got little tabs that go to various places in the book. This is also so that I don't need it. I have it there as a reminder that I can write everything down, and it's kind of like a challenge to myself to remember everything. So there's that. This is one based on worlds. Okay, we're going to be talking about the different worlds of my world today, but this one is for worlds like heaven, the veil, the vault, stuff like this. Worlds that I've created that are outside of my my norm, outside of the world of man. And it's another thing that I keep there so that I never have to use. It's like if you had an injury, and if you didn't exercise and stretch that hip or that leg, then you would have to walk with a cane. Well, if you had the cane sitting right next to your chair all the time, it would remind you, I don't want to have to depend on the cane, so I'm going to keep exercising this and stretching this leg. That's very much like the composition books are. I keep them there to remind myself that I need to stay sharp and that kind of thing. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is this right here. It's a piece of crystal. It's a piece of quartz. It's very, very cool. Kind of heavy. Shaped like a 20-sided die, if you're into Dungeons and Dragons. It's shaped like a 20-sided die. And I've heard that quartz kind of helps clear the energy of a certain area and magnify certain energies and stuff like that, if you believe in all that. If not, then it's just a beautiful piece of crystal. Okay, so that's my desk today. Today what we're going to talk about is I'm going to give you a couple readings, one from my autobiography and one from a book that I wrote, and it's talking about hell, the land of torment. I call it the land of torment and loss, and hell is a place that I've done a lot of work in. I was counting up, and I think I've done between 500 and 300 pages. I mean, between 250 and 300 pages of a story that takes place in hell, peppered through a bunch of different books that I've written. I know even more, and I have plans for even more. We'll get into why I write so much in hell, and why I deal so much in hell, and why I spend so much time writing there. It's in one of the readings. But there's a good reason for it. And I want to talk to you about some of the features that are in the hell that I'm in, that I write in, and let you get a look at some of the things that I'm doing with that and why. So we're going to get started on that. And that'll help. And then at the end, of course, we'll talk about Bramble, and we'll talk about what I have been dealing with when it comes to him, and the story unfolding before your eyes. So that's what we got planned for today, and I got to find the reading, and we'll go from there. So just wait for one moment. Okay, so I found what I'm going to read. The first one is from my autobiography, Volume 2. It's called Normal Street. And this is from the book within the volume called Patchwork. Now, thing you need to know that we haven't really gotten into, that we will in further into different seasons of this show, is that they are that I have DID, dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personalities. It's something I've been dealing with since I was 3. Yeah. So you're gonna hear in here different names, and I'll try to. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write them down. I'm gonna write them down as we go along, so that I can tell you a little bit about each one of them, so that you understand the context that we're talking about here. But here we go. This chapter is called A Trip Through Hell, and it happened in 2003. Dungeons and Dragons became a tool, not right. A path. Again, not exactly it. Maybe a blade? Yeah, let's go with that. Dungeons and Dragons became a blade that I could use to lance all of my blisters and festering wounds. It was about 2002 when it began to mean something else. It began to take shape in the throes of the worst therapy into a weapon to fight back the worst of all of it. It started when I banned the Barbarian game. This started the mountain culture that I write about in Legends of Exiles and Legends of Eastgate, and there's a lot of mountain books coming after that. That game was fun and everything was good until Peter Redfist became a focus. Here we have a little boy raised to be a leader. He is fearless and powerful and unapologetic. He is treated fairly by his people, and he has a father. This is where things get really exciting. Peter had a father named Flack Redfist, and Flack is flawed. He's not a perfect man. He's also a great leader, but he will not let himself get in the way of his kid. This becomes an issue. You can't see it yet. I'll take you a little further down this path. Peter is the hope of the mountain. He is the one able to unite all the tribes and the nations of the barbarian lands. He is trusted by everyone, loved by everyone, and Flack is a flawed man trying to raise a king. I'm still not being clear enough. Here it is for you with a bow on it. The mountain sits in unrest. None of the nations trust each other, and they're at war all the time. They're trying to destroy each other when one kid rises to unite all these broken pieces of a people, and make them one loving, prosperous unit. At the time, the different alters of my personalities were at war all the time, constantly fighting against each other. So keep that in mind. And I'm telling this story while trying to fix a shattered mind and find a leader for it, trying to find a way to cope with, build a life around, and smooth down the edges of a mind at war with itself. Peter becomes the hope for my future. Flack is the flawed man trying to prepare his son to heal them all. I had no future at this point. I was a man outside of sanity, a man whose only goal was to make it to the next day, to fix what was shattered, and to try to find a way back to Becca. I was Flack, trying to make myself into a Peter. When I figured this out, Dungeons and Dragons became important. We started playing every week. Every Saturday I would prep for the game to start around 7. We would play until about 4 in the morning, and while we played, I would try to figure it all out. I created scenarios that mimicked abuse I had suffered. They fought back that evil. I created villains based on the darkness of my past. We fought them back. I set up, then destroyed one horror after the next, and then I would go to Stephen, my therapist, to unpack the game, break down everything that I had felt about it, and build a new understanding. Dungeons and Dragons started to heal me. Then things heated up. We moved straight from the mountain to the Manhunters. The concept was simple. A band of heroes and heroines that are sponsored by the crown to hunt down the worst criminals and villains in the nation. With this concept, I created monsters like the one I had to face in my life, and I created heroes to fight them all back. Rafe Ivory Fist became the architect of my future. He fought all of my demons and showed me how to control my past and how to categorize it, shuffle it through, and command the parts of my mind that were out of control. His leadership skills became the focus of my life. How do I find a leader in my mind capable of controlling everyone, but still lenient enough to let them all express himself? With a crew of wild, powerful, and capable individuals, I began to build a team out of my group of alters that had no system and had no leader. The creation of the Manhunters was the beginning of my healing. We then moved into the Tremerian Night Game. This is where I developed a training regimen for the powers in my mind. I honed them and focused them into distinct members of my inner society that had jobs and responsibilities. This is when my alters were given a place. They were organized and became task-oriented. Shade was given the running of the games. Given the running of the games, they all had certain responsibilities that they had to see to in order to rest. What had been a group of alters in pain and thrashing became a team of individuals, empowered and utilized. Without the Tremerian Night Game, the alters within me would have continued to wander. They would have continued to bump into each other. But as Shade ran that game, he began to line everyone up and make a future for all of us. These 3 games were played over the course of about 2 years. And when we got as far as the Tremerian Night Game, things started to become regimented. The gaming group had been pared down to Siren and Becca. As much as they disliked each other, they were able to set it all aside to create characters that I could use as a focal point when telling these stories. We did not play that game with anyone else, and when we played, it was not play. All that's new by my outbursts, the times I would break down and cry, and the true horror of the game was running that I was working out my issues. Dungeons and Dragons had given me a life in middle school and high school, and now it was saving my life as a man. It was mending my shattered mind and giving me a place to rage, to weep, and to heal. The undeniable odds that I placed against my players was one thing, but the weight of the responsibility was an entirely different matter. Imagine you're asked to play a game that will be an analogy for a man's sanity. You are asked to enter his worst nightmares and suffer the horrible things he will throw at you, and you have to be right. You have to deal with the weight of it every day. You have to be a hero in his artistic and demented art he is creating. One misstep from you would cause him to tumble into a pit of despair, cause him to lose hope. If you fail to save a character that he's placed a great deal of importance on, it will toss him into depression. Or maybe even break him for days, if not weeks. When he is ready to play, you need to play. It's therapy for him, so you have to be there anytime he needs you. Now you're playing at hours nearly unbearable. 19-hour games where you stop for half an hour before you're back at it. Days and nights you give up to this way of life, never knowing if one wrong word or even a bad roll of the dice will cause this nearly insane man to tumble off the edge of reality. Dungeons and Dragons took over the lives of 3 people, and those 3 people fought a war with analogy and symbolisms for a man's future. Thinking back on it now, I can't imagine the pressure those 2 women were under when they sat to play those games. The sheer weight of my future hanging on every decision, every action they chose. One day it became too much. We had made it through the mountain, the Manhunters, and the Chimerian Knights, and I said I wanted to run a game through hell. I had ideas of what the land of torment and loss would be like, and I needed to express it and needed to see it. The importance of this game could not be overstated. The darkness I was living with was real and hideous in my mind. It was trapped and being felt by only me. Every second of every day I walked through a personal hell. This would give me a way of expressing it, of vomiting out all the horror of my life. This would be a way of ripping the darkness out of my heart and holding it up to these 2 people. A way of freeing myself from some of the worst of my emotions and letting them all play out before an audience. This would be the most important game I would ever run. Siren refused. Okay, now before I blast Siren, let's take a minute and see why. We are using the characters that they have played through the Chimerian Knight campaign. These were characters they had spent half a year building. They had toiled for every magic item and every ability. They had become these characters in a real way, and they felt a responsibility for them. These characters had become part of them. First thing that happened in hell was a character took a permanent hit. They would be weakened for the life of the character, and that weakness would never be healed. Also, while they were in hell, a demon would take their place. A demon that looked just like them with all of the same items and powers would be loose in the world of man to run wild and hurt everything that it wanted to. All of the characters' loved ones would be exposed to this demon. Well, Siren decided it was not worth it, and she said, "I'm not playing this game." I took the blow like a hit to the chest. Becca dropped into silence, and I looked at Siren with shocked eyes. "What do you mean?" "I worked hard for these abilities. I care about the relationships that my characters have made, and I'm not okay with throwing all that away. So no, I'm not doing this. You have to find another way and make this easier, or I'm not playing." I threw her out of my apartment. I threw them out. I didn't know what to do. I had been given a chance to express the true horror of what I was going through, and it was being taken away. I screamed into a pillow. I shut off all the lights, and I knew that in that moment that I would have to face it all alone. I was trapped in my hell, and no one was coming in to see or to burn with me. Becca will not tell me exactly what was said. When the 2 of them reached the parking lot, Becca pulled Siren into the gazebo of South Towers, and they talked. Strong words were used. I'm sure that no threats were issued, but Becca got vicious. Her message was simple. This man needs to scream. He needs to throw out some of the darkness he has trapped inside of himself, and he needs to not be alone with it. She told Siren to get her mind right and get over it, not to put a character over my sanity. Becca said that this game was the only thing that mattered in the world to me. It would heal me or break me based on how they played it, and they had no other options. This game was going to be played. Becca told Siren that when Siren left, Becca was going upstairs to beg me to run the game with only her. He's going to play this game with you or without you. The playing conditions were rough. They had to sit in each other's seat. Siren had a section of the couch, and Becca had a section of the couch that they'd been used to for over a year. They had to switch, throwing off the rhythm of the room. I had background music playing. From the kitchen came one playlist filled with happy, cool songs that made that person feel good. From the living room, I had different music. Hard, angry music that called for blood and clenched fists. With these 2 outside influences created an atmosphere of confusion and made it hard to concentrate. The TV was turned to static. Okay, so you might not know this, but television used to come across the air as stations, not through the internet. There were channels on your television that did not have shows on them, and when you turned into one of these channels, a white and gray and black static would hiss at you. It colored the room in a chaotic kind of light that was distracting and off-putting. Under these conditions, we stepped off the road of man and entered the home of my demons. I showed them things. things I could never talk about. Now, Smiling Jack ran a lot of that game, giving his horror and his fear to both those women. I pulled from a lot of sources for the content, but none of it was as bad as the original scenes and the settings that my mind created. Siren walked through that hell and fought everything I showed to her. She faced it all, and she saw the demented and disturbing images that were trapped in my head. She took the blistering abuse of my rage and my hate, and she fought it all back under confusing and disorienting conditions. She saw the face of horror as shown to her by a shattered and screaming mind. And for that, I thank her. Alright, that's the first reading. And we're going to talk about all of the things that you need to know in order to understand it at the end of this video. So now I'm going to find the next thing that I want to read to you, and it is an excerpt from one of the books that I wrote, and we'll talk about that and all of this and where I'm at with the Bramble situation. And we'll do that when I come back. Alright, so thought a lot about what I would read from my Hell excerpts. Hell's been talked about in the book Lethem. And you get to see a castle made out of a hollowed out god that is still alive. There's some stories in Hell in the book Crown. There's some stories of Hell, and you go to this city called Stranus. They're in Hell because they're looking for a particular weapon that's ended up there. It has the soul of an ancient warrior in it, and they're trying to find it and get it free. So they go to Stranus. You get to see a marketplace in a city of Hell. You get to see a bar, the inside of a bar in the city of Hell. One of the cities of Hell. There's a lot here to deal with. What I've decided to do is I'm going to read an excerpt from a book that has not come out yet. The book is called On the Corpse of Wrath. And basically it's a book that takes place in Hell. There was a god that died here, and his name was Wrath. And the end of the book is trying to get to a building built by his corpse. So the Hell that I've created is vast. It's very vast. There's a couple of things that you wanna know about it. First of all, the sun. Hell has a ceiling, and the sun of Hell is a goddess, and she's been chained to the top of the ceiling, and she has been set on fire. Basically, in my world, there was a great god war, and evil gods were fighting good gods, and everything in between. Like, some decent people, but had reasons to fight for the evil were, there's never when you're talking about a great group of people, there's never a clear line between good and evil. But some of the basically another force comes in, demons, and what you could call angels. They're actually called sentries, but what you could call angels. Eventually, when the gods had pounded on each other for long enough, these two forces jumped up, subdued the gods, took the troublemakers to their own personal prisons. The evil gods who would have kept the war going were taken down into Hell. And they held trial there, and all of them were sentenced to something. The goddess of languages, was sentenced to burn in the sky. She was told she needed to create a brand new language for the main Lord of Hell, and she was told that it had to be perfect, or she would never be free, and that he would ask her to give him his language in 120,000 years. While she burns, she can't think, but every now and then the fire will go out, and you can just see like an ember up there, and then it bursts into flames again. The thing about the sun, though, is that it's not regular. It's not regulated. Like, sometimes it'll be 2 hours long that the sun will be out and burning, and then it'll go down. It'll go out for a year. Sometimes the sun will go for years beyond count. You never know. It's not a 24-hour kind of thing. You never know exactly what to expect from the sun. So there's that. If you look, you can see that her arms and her legs have been burnt away to nothing. I was told to talk about the skin bridge. There are 2 sections of hell that have a crack down the middle of them. And every now and then they'll come together. And every now and then they'll pull apart. And you can't predict when that's going to happen. And there is a bridge stretched across and nailed to the 2 sides that's made out of skin. And that's how you get across. The only thing is, if they're pushed all the way to the open, then you can just go across, no problem. But if they start to come in like this, then your bridge starts to sag. And, of course, you start to fall. You've got to climb. It's a terrible thing. There are gods that are tied to the inside of the crater. So when the 2 pieces come together, those gods are crushed. When they come back apart, those gods start to reform. One of the gods that was taken and thrown in hell is the god of weathering. So like the god that crumbles buildings after a long time. When wind hits statues for long periods of time, or water hits something for long periods of time, it'll weather away the details. Well, the god of weathering is in hell. So that does not happen in my world. There are buildings, there are entire sections of the world that are like 100,000 years old, and they're not crumbling yet. Statues that still have their faces after 120,000 years. That is because the god of weathering, the god who would normally make all that crumble, is in hell, and he's not doing anything there. So, because he's in hell, everything in hell is falling apart. So there's buildings toppled over on top of each other, streets that are just being ripped up, all this kind of stuff. Hell is suffering from the weathering effects, but the world of man is not. So everything is pretty permanent in the world of man. The big one is nobody is happy in hell. Not the demons, not the souls trapped there, not the races that are unique to that place, not even the people that are in control. Nobody is happy in hell. Everybody is suffering in some way. Hell is not, it's not possible to go there and enjoy what you're doing. It's just not. The most powerful lord of hell, his name is Blythe. He's been in a couple of books now. And Blythe is made out of sulfur. And he gives off a great amount of heat. His eyes are black. When he talks, you can see burning sulfur in his mouth. When he cracks his fingers, you can see sulfur in all the joints. I mean, you can see burning sulfur in all the joints. He is just burning. He's in constant misery, and he's the most powerful person in hell. Everybody suffers when they go to hell. No one's happy. Um, the anybody who casts spells, all wizards, when they cast spells, demons are drawn to them because a spellcaster is a delicacy there. When a demon eats their aura, it has a certain flavor that it can't get anywhere else. So anytime anybody casts, they get um, hunted down. But the thing that's most terrible about the hell that I have created, as told to me by somebody that I talked to recently, is the tiny details. Things that you wouldn't expect. Like at one point there's a scene in Crown where they're in a bar and this guy spits on the floor and a mouth opens up from the floor, licks the spit and closes back up again. You could never have expected that. That's just one of those things. There's a demon in the marketplace and he is selling weapons. He's selling swords and stuff. And he's got this human bent over in front of him. And as he's talking, he's cutting off pieces very delicately of this human's back and body and putting them in his mouth. And he's eating this person's back while they bend over for him like a table as he is talking to people he's selling weapons to. He also happens to have a mouth in his neck. Just little tiny details that don't mean anything, but really hit you and are really, really difficult for you to miss. You can't be braced for that kind of thing. You go into a city in hell, you kind of have an idea, okay, this is going to be like this, and the buildings are going to be made out of, okay, and this is where I need to look for dangerous stuff, and this is where I need to brace myself and things. But in the hell that I have, it's filled with subtle things that are difficult for you. Now, this piece that I'm going to read now is a chapter from hell that is it's about this army that is moving towards hell to get to the Corpse of Wrath to deal with a dark entity there. Basically, they have found out where the god Hakjahu is. And Hakjahu has been tearing down their culture for years. And they go into hell, this entire army, like 10,000 men, go into hell to try to find and kill the god Hakjahu. Hakjahu can be found in a couple other books. We don't need to talk about those. But basically, this is a section about the ocean in hell. It's right outside the city I've been talking about, Styrinus. Styrinus is a port city. It's right outside the city I've been talking about. It's pertinent for the conversation that I'm going to be having with you. And basically, this is what it's like to travel the sea when you are in hell. In Crown, it is said that it was a great big, humongous hole, and a creature crawled inside of it and started bleeding. And the crater filled up, and that's what created the ocean of hell. The water is made out of blood, and there is tissue that is washing up on its shores. It's called Down to the Depths. The four of them stood on the dock watching as the men climbed aboard the dipping ships. Oh, the other thing is this is a very rough draft, so there's going to be a lot of mistakes in this. The sea looked angry. It bounded and bucked like a raging animal, and Miston shook his head and lowered his gaze upon Craven. "You're sure about this?" he said. "That is beyond my experience. I don't trust it." "It's water, Helmgard. Just a lot of water," Gon said. As the words were spoken, something large rose from the depths and into the air. It looked like a bone, only 30 feet high and covered in black and red water. "There is no way that is water," Miston said. "It has things in it, and smells like a long rotting beast. My father was killed in the Half-Blood Wars in Findi land. The battle lasted for days. When it was done, we had not the men to send in after our dead. By the time we got them, they had set in the sun baking for weeks. The battlefield was, until that point, indescribable. I've never smelled anything so rank in all my days. But if it would get me away from this stink, I would live on that battlefield for the last of my days. This is no water. We are go now into a dying creature, still but barely alive and raging in its last moments. No way around it, Gaunt said. He looked at Craven and nodded. You're doing it the right thing. It's either this or we go back. We're not going back, Belcron said. This is a path before us. It is the only one for us to take, and we will not waver. We have packed our ships and sent our men in to get your feet under you on board. We will take the Rose Boys with us, Craven said. Good, Misson said. I don't trust a man with a woman's sword. Craven had heard them called rapiers, and knew them to be valid warrior weapons, but his own experience would not let him raise the issue. Weapons were the man. He had known that from the very first day he had lived with the Bloodblades. These swords seemed to lack character and strength. He looked at his mightiest captain, and he grimly nodded, wondering which of them he would see again. Gaunt traveled with him. It's too damn valuable to lose in another ship. If Craven survived this, he would need Khan there, no matter who else survived. They loaded on the ships, and Craven didn't even count his men. 150 to each boat. He didn't like stretching his numbers this far. Craven was relieved to see that Prekin had enough ships to transport everyone at once, though he had talked once about half-loading his boats and making a second trip for those that did not fit. Craven had stood his ground and absolutely refused. The Dark, that's the name of the captain, just nodded and smiled and walked away. It was some time before the ship was underway. Things had to be prepared and stored, barrels loaded, along with suffering victims of slavery and torture. Craven watched them being brought in and hated the apathy he felt at the sight of them. More and more suffering and damnation had become background noise to him. He no longer felt much pity, and he had seen the same in the eyes of his men. He knew that hell was changing him, and he hated and resented it. With a heave and a surge, the ship pulled anchor, and they were off. The going seemed very slow, and it took hours before the sight of the town was gone from them. Craven longed for the horizon until it was all he could see. Once land had slipped completely away, he ached to see it again. He asked Prekin about it, and the Commodore laughed. We are yet underway, and he wants all to be over. Prepare yourself for a long journey. This ocean is vast, and we have far to traverse. The sea was a different sort of creature once they were at its mercy. Her waves no longer came in uniform order to splash against the front of the boat. She now hit them from all sides. They rocked and pitched with her every whim, and at times she would fall out from beneath them, and they would all at once fall into a shadowy hollow with raging waves rising all around. The very next moment, they would be thrown into the air as the walls around them fell away. She swayed her hips like the dancing demoness in the bar they had stayed in. She squeezed and slapped and gave no end of unpredictable punishments, but the worst by far was the thing she showed them. She pulled back her skirt. The ocean pulled back her skirt every now and then to show what hid beneath. Creatures would pass larger than the ship and snapping and devouring large hunks of dead flesh that floated around them. Mysterious beasts they were, rising but a bit from the water, just high enough to show a fraction of their massive girth. They bore scars and missing chunks, and Craven knew that even here in this place, no manner of man or beast was free from torture and horror. There was something hunting these behemoths, clawing and slashing at them, some unfathomable terror too vile to comprehend. It was out there, and as Craven looked at the long line of ships that rode around and behind him, he wondered if they could get this many people by the creature without alerting it to their presence. Gaunt was unreadable. He sat on the prow of the ship looking out at the water. In his hand he held a knife, and he slowly, methodically sliced away the rotting flesh from his hand and arm. The blackened meat had separated, stank, and though he whittled away at the very flesh of his arm, he seemed unable to feel any of the pain. Fingers would cut away and yellow tendons, and soon the hand was but a nub, where once a palm had been. He sheathed his knife, and Craven watched in horror as he grabbed the fresh bandage from his pouch he carried. He looked awkward in the binding, and Craven went to help. "Does it hurt?" Craven asked. He knew how stupid the question was, but felt bound to ask it anyway. "It is an exquisite torture," Gaunt said. He rolled the wrist over, and Craven saw new flesh ripping and tearing. He winced and kept at his wrapping. "Does yours?" Gaunt asked. Craven froze. He thought of the hellish pain he almost constantly in his crutch since the demoness had seduced him, and he cursed. "It does," Craven said. "A lot." "Have you even looked at it?" Gaunt said. Craven shook his head. "I've had not the time." "That's a lie," Gaunt said. Craven felt anger for the moment bubbling up within him before the futility of it rose up, and he laughed. "For days after the child disappeared, we sat in the bar doing nothing productive at all. You had plenty of time to look and see what was wrong with it. But you didn't. Why?" "Not sure," was all Craven could say. He thought of looking at the wound, and it filled him with horror. He could not imagine what it would look like or feel like. The whole of the area seemed wet and crusted to handle. How did you get it?" Gaunt asked. "The Oracle?" Gaunt raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "It's time to go look at it, I think," he said. Craven grit his teeth and nodded. "Fine. Want me to come with you?" And for one fleeting, vulnerable moment, Craven did. He wanted someone to help him through it and take care of him the way no one had ever done before in his life. He wanted to be told it would be okay. He wanted to be cleaned up and bandaged. He looked at Gaunt, seeing none of the gentle touch that he really wanted, and he shook his head. You're just trying to get a look. I don't want you eaten up with envy. Better stay here." Gaunt laughed, because that's what he was supposed to do, and Craven went below to decks to the room he had been provided. Now, in this story, Craven has been seduced by a demon, and he got an STD in hell. I'm not going to read what that looks like. You're going to have to buy the book for that. I'm going to continue on until we find our way back to the ship. He looked at Gaunt and could not hold back the tears when he shook his head. He ran to the banister and vomited into the water. The water seemed to gobble it up, and Craven pulled back horrified. Days passed, too many and too incomprehensible to count. The unpredictable lengths of the days here were beginning to wear on Craven, so that every passing day only brought more confusion and horror. It was either too long or not long enough before a man yelled, and Prekin rushed to the banners and looked out over the approaching sea. His face seemed locked in horror, and he turned and spit out a line of guttural words that only his crew had hopes of understanding. "What is it?" Craven said, stopping before the Commodore and grabbing him by the shoulders. "Marauders," the man said. "We're under attack. Get your men up and prepare them to fight. I'm not in this alone. You're tied to my side. If I go down, so do you." Craven rushed to the prow and looked out at tiny figures it seemed that stand out on the horizon. He looked at things, unable to discern what they were until his eye adjusted and he decided they were ships. He smiled as he thought of the surprise that they would find when they saw that this was a fleet of hundreds of ships loaded with soldiers. But as he felt the kick of excitement, he began to see that this was not a few ships. The horizon was peppered with them. Dozens or more seemed to sprout up as they neared, until Craven could not count anymore. They kept coming, and over again and again popping up over the horizon and filling Craven with dread. They grew in size until they could be seen as massive power ships filled with snarling warriors. Craven looked up at two flags, and for a long moment froze in horror at what he saw. The ship's flag was largest and grandest. It flapped furious, a black flag seeming to be made of skin, with a sword crossed on a breaking sword. Below this flag, lowered on the mast, flapped a red banner with a white maggot squirming upon it. The maggot wore dozens of razor-sharp teeth, and it looked as if it knew the face of its enemy without having to guess. "Hak Jehu has finally shown his face, men! Let's show him his doom!" The boats collided, and hooks were thrown. The boats were pulled together, and mayhem broke loose and ravishing. The fight was a seduction that Craven and his men would not fight against. This was the very thing they had come for. After seemingly years of horror after horror, their enemy had shown itself. Craven scurried over the side of the ship and dove into the battle, overcome with bloodlust and a mad desire for death and destruction. The army of Hakshahu were nightmares of torture and darkness, and they had been skinned and beaten, snapped and broken here in hell, and it seemed that their horrors had only fueled a passion for pain and death. They threw themselves on at Craven and his men, with no sign of defense or caution. Craven was hit with a mad press of bodies and weapons. He pushed back to the banister, and they rushed him headlong. He moved and slashed, calling upon a sword in his hand and the men at his side. He moved with passion and hate, taking many hits and fighting to hold his ground. He hacked them into the ground, only to step over them and move on. Another enemy ship slammed into the other side of the boat, and hooks were thrown. A wave of insane Hakjahu warriors rocked their boat, and Craven braced himself for attack. A man pushed against Craven's back, and he turned to find one of his men pressing his back to him and fighting off the hordes. Craven could not see the man's face, but he knew a bloodblade when he saw one, and he turned back to the fighting. Craven heard a song lifting over the battle and recognized it as a bloodblade song. He lifted his voice and joined, hearing many men around him doing the same. It was not long before Craven saw first one enemy, then another, singing as they fought. Soon the whole of the boat, save the demons and the Commodore, were singing, and Craven felt his tears rising. These were not nameless hordes, tortured into insanity and thrown at him. These were his people, the other bloodblades that had come before Hakjahu had thrust upon his nation. These were his fathers and grandfathers, men who had their afterlife overrun and brought in chains through hell and bound to Hakjahu's will. Craven could not stop himself from weeping, or the death that he was forced to deal. He fought on, cutting down his ancestors and stepping over them. He fought for what seemed hours before the fires jumped up around them and the boat shuddered. Craven looked at the helm to see peak in the dark, guiding the ship as it crumbled around him. Within moments they slammed into something, and the demon's crew threw hooks forward and toward the water. The hook shook, and every demon sailor began leaping overboard at the front of the ship. Craven fought his way to the side of the ship and looked out over the front, seeing a huge mass of floating death. The corpse of some enormous beast was before them, and every man alive on the ship was leaping to its surface. It crawled with monsters, and devoured its flesh. It stank, and raising waves of nauseating air rose from its surface, and it bobbed in the water. More and more of the boats were tossing hooks over their sides and climbing upon this thing as the ships themselves burned and broke. Craven looked to the Commodore, who stood staring out at his ship with an unreadable face. He did not move to disembark. He did not move to save himself, and Craven did not take the time to look at him before leaping over himself. The ropes were cut free, and the boat took back to the water. The burning ships turned around and slowly sank into the depths below. Craven looked at the land he stood on, seeing Hakjahu's forces jumping from ships and rushing to meet them atop the bloated corpse of whatever horror the sea and hell had vomited up. Okay. I think that's enough. That's a view into hell. And I'm going to talk about why I chose to read that to you and what we can understand from it. And we'll go from there. Okay, so let's get it out. First one I read to you from Normal Street was really about the first time that I ran a hell game. It was very cathartic. I did a lot of dealing with the terrible things that had been done to me. Jack got to explore those. So let me tell you a little bit about Smiling Jack. He is a alter from my D&D, and when I first became aware of him, I was having images. I was having hallucinations of him. It was explained to me by my therapist that I needed to embrace these hallucinations and become Jack, who we call the Master of Monsters. Jack has a certain look, and he's got certain abilities. First of all, when I first saw him, I'll probably read some stuff about Jack in a later, maybe in the second season, because I plan on dealing with my DID a lot in the second season. When I first came across Jack, he had the appearance of a man that was about 7 feet tall, who weighed almost nothing, and he had long black hair that came from the top of his head all the way down to his feet. It was ratted and tangled, and it fell all the way to his feet, covering his entire body. When he reached out for me, because he used to always reach out for me, I noticed that his arms were so long that they came down to his ankles, and you would just get these very long, bony hands, arms that would come out with you, very long fingers. He was a nightmare, and he stalked me for years before I finally embraced him and got to understand what he was. And what he is a fear drinker. My life was filled with so much terror when I was growing up, and so much fear, that I developed an altar to deal with it, and this is what he became. I won't tell you about the moment that he was born. It's not in any of my autobiographies. It's simply too terrible, and it's just, I won't get into it. It was a moment of absolute horror. Nobody needs that in their life except the therapist and somebody that's helping you work through it. I'm not going to put that out for the general public to have to handle. Developing a relationship with Jack was very weird for a lot of people. He has this ability to take fear from you. My best example of this is shortly after he came out. Me and Becca went to the movie theater to watch the movie The Ring. I don't know how many of you have ever seen this movie, but The Ring is an intense horror movie. And at one point, this scene is being described, and this mother is walking into her daughter's bedroom. And she walks in, and the TV is on to static. And she looks around the room, and she doesn't see her daughter. And she opens up the closet. Her daughter is curled up in the end of the closet, and she's got this terrible thing wrong with her face. It's an absolutely horrific scene. I had seen the movie before. Jack had seen the movie before. And they were sitting next to each other. Him and Becca were sitting next to each other. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of terror that is built into the moments when she pulls the closet open. And with all of that ramping up, Becca was getting more and more upset. And Jack is sitting there, and at that moment, when the closet door opened, he put his hand on Becca's knee. When he did that, she felt all of the fear from her body drain from her body and go into his hand, and she was able to look at the picture of that girl's face and experience none of the fear of it. It was like she was looking at anything else, a tulip or a bowl of Frosted Flakes or something. It had no effect on her whatsoever. Jack is just able to drink fear, and he can produce fear. He can give me hallucinations of fear. He used to get very temperamental, and he'd give me hallucinations of terrible things around me that I had to ignore because other people were around. At one point, I took a guest into my living room, and the moment I got into my living room, there were corpses of my child laid out all around me, and I had to act as if nothing was wrong. And we found out later that the reason he was doing that is because he wanted us to buy him a movie. He used to be very much like this. Jack is a very difficult creature to live with. And at this particular point in my life, when he ran the game, the Dungeons & Dragons game that took place in hell, he was bubbling and steaming and swelling and all this kind of stuff, and he needed some kind of outlet. So he did this. There's a part where it says that Siren did not want to do the game. She did not want to play the game. Well, the real reason she didn't want to play the game was because she was in a struggle with Becca to win my heart. And Siren was very unhealthy, and what she wanted was domination. She wanted to dominate me in every way. We had played the mountain game, and in the mountain game, Becca had a love interest. The love interest was Flack, who is a major character. That was mentioned in the story. The Siren's love interest was almost non-existent. Then we played the Manhunter game, and Becca had a character in the Manhunter game that had a major love interest, and Siren didn't. So in these games, there would be times when I would be running a character and be talking to Becca in a relationship, and a loving relationship, and flirting with her and all this kind of stuff. And Siren had to watch that. So the character that was going to go into hell, she had finally managed to get a love story in one of the games. She had a relationship with a character named Abladra, and he was not going into hell with her. Her character, when she got into hell, a demon went out that looked like her. You heard all about that. She was afraid it would go to Abladra and kill Abladra, and when she got out of hell, she wouldn't have a love interest. So in order to try to keep her love interest safe, so that we could continue to have that, and she could continue to develop some kind of loving relationship with me, she didn't want to have to go into hell. So there was a lot of relationship politics that went into the preparation before the hell game. In the end, it was more important to her to keep some kind of hold on me, and some kind of romantic hold, than it was for me to deal with the dark things that were going on in my mind. She went downstairs, they went to the gazebo, they talked the whole thing through. And I'm gonna let Rebecca tell you how the conversation went. She's right here. She's gonna come over and talk about it. She's not happy about it because she's got a sucker, and she wants to suck on her sucker.
Hey guys.
So you left. I was obviously upset. I got a braid.
Yeah.
I was obviously upset. As soon as she said she wouldn't play the game, I freaked out. I threw everybody out. And they went downstairs, and I thought they were gone. But Becca drug Siren to the gazebo, and yeah.
Okay, so what we talked about was she wasn't quite ready to leave. We sat outside, and I tried to talk her into going back and running the game and playing the game because there had been a lot of buildup, and running a game in hell was a really important way for Jesse to process some of the trauma he was dealing with. And we had been running these characters, so we kind of, needed everybody in the game. So I told her that, I told her that that he needed our help to, run the game so that he could process some of the amount of trauma and abuse that he'd been storing, because fantasy was an important way for him to do that. And that didn't work. And then I also told her something that she didn't know about, which was sort of the number of players over the years who had really wanted to see what Jesse Teller's hell would look like. It had been a game setting that, as a DM, he had talked about for many years, and he had many players over the years who said, "Oh man, if you ever run that, let me in, please." And most of them were people that had spread out or weren't in touch with anymore, or whatever, where it wasn't practical. But I thought that would appeal to her, to know that there had been quite a bit of draw for it over the years, and that it was a real honor to get to run a game in that setting. And I don't know, we talked about it for a while. Nothing was really getting through. She was really concerned about the effects that it would have on her character sheet, and like Jesse said, the other characters in the game that she had developed a lot of time with and things like that. So sometimes when I look back at this conversation, I wonder why I didn't just say bye and watch her walk away. But in the moment, it seemed like a really important thing that we needed both players to make the game work. And so what I ended up doing that worked was I told her, look, fine, just leave, and you can go, and I'm going to go upstairs and beg Jesse to run this game for me. And we're going to run this hell game with you or without you. And looking at it that way, it took her about 5 seconds to realize that she didn't want to be left out of it. And she got up and walked over to the phone, called Jesse's apartment, and worked things out. And we ended up not starting it that night because everyone had gotten too emotional, but then she did agree to play the game, so we got to, I think it was a couple days later when we started it. But anyway, so that's how that went.
So what was it like running that game?
What was it like in the game?
What was it like running that game?
Well, one of the really cool things about it was that he played 2 different sets of music in the room. So there was this really offsetting kind of emotional sort of dissonance in the room, because he had 2 different kinds of music going at the same time. And then, did you already talk about what kind of damage our characters had to take in order to go?
No.
So we had to trade a soul for a soul kind of thing to go into hell. And so there was going to be someone from hell that would go out and take our place in the real world disguised as us. And then for us to run through hell, we had to automatically take 50 points of damage. And then we had to, in order to survive the setting, the realm, we had to be under constant suffering, or it would be like too much for our brains to stay there if we weren't under constant suffering. So there was a kind of demon, I forget what you called them, but they like latched onto our backs and sort of drained a certain amount of hit points every day. And so there were some things like that where it's just automatic numbers kind of things. I think we lost some levels permanently, and I think that we lost some proficiencies permanently. But like the game itself, it was very raw. I mean, I don't have to tell you, it was very dark, and it was very hopeless. We got into a really difficult sort of storyline, and there were definitely a lot of points where it felt like there was no way to get out of this and make it through. And it took us a lot of sessions to run it, and it was that was I've never been in anything like it. It was amazing, and I feel like in his books he represents it really well because it was this really dark, really creative version of hell that is like not very fire and brimstone like. It's just like really weird and disturbing, and um it was really hard to run, but it was like totally one of my favorite games that you've
She
done.
had Becca and her character's love interest had this certain kind of armor that had been the armor of a very powerful Chimerian knight before them, and it had thorns coming all over it, coming out all over it, and it was just from the waist up, and that character, their soul was trapped in hell. When they went into hell, it burst into flames. So the whole time her character is playing, the armor she's wearing is on fire. So that was one of the things
Right.
that had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They had to fight this thing that had the swords they were going into hell to get. Basically, an army. There was a demon war. Demons came out of this gate. The Chimerian knights were able to fight them to the gate, but they needed to push the army into the gate and have the gate closed, so whoever went in was going to be trapped there. So an army of about 200 Chimerian knights, this was long, long ago, had fought their way in, and the gates had been closed behind them, and they had been trapped in there. Of course, they all died, but they had a piece of their soul inside their sword. And that, what they were going for was they were going to get the sword to bring it back into the world of man so that they could pull the soul out of the sword and resurrect the person, hence freeing them from hell. Well, when they got to the actual major demon that had the sword, he wore it on his body. He wore those swords on his body. The handles were all chained to his body on long chains. So when they fought him, he would come at them and spin, and you just have this big storm of 500 blades swinging at you at the same time. And they had to find a way to fight that. He had armor over his head and his neck. None of his vulnerable places were showing. And his entire body was a whirling blade. Series of blades. There was a lot of stuff like that. Some really intense things. There was the city of traitors. And biblically, a traitor's death is being hanged. Traitors are always hanged, biblically and historically. And so the outside wall that formed around this city in hell that had the demon lord of traitors, the outside wall was just a series. The outside wall was a series of gallows that went all the way around the wall, and you had like 5 deep of traitors that were hung. So you had to push your way through the bodies. It was a horrific game, and there was a lot of terrible things that they had to get through. But in the end, the thing that got them through was the way that the characters felt about each other and about the other players that were there. And there was a kind of love that the people they were traveling with brought into hell that was enough to get them through it. And that was the lesson that we needed to hear. And that was the reason we were running the game. Because what we learned from the game is that no matter how terrible the therapy was, the people we were around and the other personalities inside my bodies, the other alters inside my bodies, held enough love for us to get through whatever hell we were in. So after we figured out how to survive in a Dungeons and Dragons world, it helped us learn how to survive in this one and pushed me forward in my therapy. It was a breakthrough in my therapy. Yeah. Anyway, that's all. You can go.
Okay.
You don't have to sit on your knees on a.
I gotta make sure the kids went to bed.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the game. Now the actual reading that I gave. The reason I chose to give that reading is because I wanted you to get a look at the ocean of hell. Later in the book, they get away from the marauders. They're on the boats, they're riding, and the waters start to heat up, and the sailors that are used to being on the land, they freak out. Throw the ship into as fast as they possibly can as the waters start to heat up, and eventually the ocean of hell boils. And they're riding through it, and when it boils, all of the living creatures rise up out of the water to sustain themselves, and most of them can fly, and there's flying horrors that are usually underneath the water that are swooping down onto the boats and attacking the boats. There's bodies that come up, and in the book, one of the ships is going down, and they jump off of the ship to get onto a floating corpse that could sink at any moment, that is rotting under their feet. Things like this. And as you can tell, it's pretty horrific. There is Craven's STD. And basically things are really ugly down there. And he's in constant pain. And he hasn't told anybody, but Khan, the guy that you saw cutting dead parts off of his hand, that is their scout. That's the guy that's scouting hell. Can you imagine that job? He's scouting hell for them. And he's the only one who has noticed that Craven is in a lot of pain. And Craven tells him he got it from the Oracle of Hell that he slept with. That Oracle of Hell, her name is Shanroa, of the 2nd level. And she's actually in a book that's published right now called Onslaught of Madness. And she went there to get the seed of a very powerful warlord, so that she could give birth to his baby, and his baby could become, when it grew up, the new general of hell. When she's in the world of man, she does not have this STD. When she's in the world of hell, she does. The demons are immune to it, but any human that has sex with her in the world of hell gets this STD. I know there's a nugget in there about the Bramble situation. I don't want to call my mother a demonic whore. I don't think she is. Any lesser man she had sex with, it broke them. It broke Char to have a relationship with her. It broke my stepdad Mumble to have a relationship with her. It was like she if she didn't have a certain kind of man in a relationship, she couldn't handle they couldn't handle it. My mom's not an easy person to live with. I guess the STD analogy is tied up in that. Her third husband, I call him Honed in the book. Honed was also broken by her, and the things he went through with her. And the only person that ever was able to have a relationship and get away from it was Bramble. I don't know if she broke him. If he knew that I was his son, then being pushed out of her life and kept away from me might have. I don't know. Basically, so that's, I think, the STD analogy. There's just so much damage that is done when you're in a relationship with Rose. To all her children, to her brothers, to nieces and nephews, all this kind of stuff. There's so much damage that is done in a relationship with that woman. She was just a whore. I think it was because she was always unhappy, a victim for most of her life. Things like this. That kind of stuff wears on you. It breaks you. The other thing I want to talk about is the things rising up out of the water. Right now, I feel like I'm in hell because I can't get the answers that I'm looking for. I can't get the DNA test back. And memories rise up out of nowhere. I never know when to expect them. I never know what they are. Insecurities come out of nowhere. And I suffer from hallucinations daily. And some of the things that I'm seeing when I walk into a room, when I'm driving down the road, when I wake up at night, things that are standing over me when I wake up in the middle of sleep, stuff like this. Things that are walking around this room right now are like horrors bubbling up out of the sea. Basically, the reason I wanted to talk about hell today is because until I find out more about this DNA test, I feel like I'm going to be spending a lot of my time in a kind of mental anguish, in a kind of experience where I am trapped in what I like to call, in my work, the land of torment and loss. So that is our episode for the day. I know it was very dark. I hope that part of it was very, very cool. Either way, do all the things. I'm not going to say the things because I hate it when people say the things. My wife has a poetry channel on YouTube. We've talked about it before. It's called Hairbrush Poetry Jam. I'm going to link the channel. I'm going to link the most recent episode because it's about a piece of my history that she chose to talk about this week on Wednesday when it came out. But she's got a very cool thing she does at the end with the subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff. She's got a very cool way of presenting it. And I'm going to clip it on the end of this video. So I won't have to say do all the things, and I won't have to detail what the things are. I'm going to allow a piece of my wife's channel to say those things for me, just so that you can see how creative she is, how creative she has chosen of a way to deal with this part of the video that I think a lot of people are tired of hearing about. So I'm going to throw her outro on the end of this video, and it'll show just how brilliant she is, and it'll show basically what I want to say that I refuse to say. So I'm going to go straight into that. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, so there's only one thing left to do. I think like a scholar and spin like a baller, so hit the subscribe if you care what I holler, the bell and the like, and you'll show me some love. My jam is a poem, I don't ask for much, because who needs a microphone? I have a hairbrush.